Literature. Ukrainian literature. Technically, the history of Ukrainian literature dates all the way back to the 11th century, following the Christianization of Kievan Rus. However, these earliest writings were liturgical and were written in the Old Church Slavonic language, not in true Ukrainian. Historical accounts of the time were referred to as chronicles, the most significant of which was the Primary Chronicle. Literary activity faced a sudden decline during the Mongol invasion of Rus. Lesya Ukrinka, one of the foremost Ukrainian women writers, Ukrainian literature again began to develop in the 14th century and was advanced significantly in the 16th century with the invention of the printing press and with the beginning of the Cossack era under both Russian and Polish dominance. The Cossacks established an independent society and popularized a new kind of epic poems, which marked the high point of Ukrainian oral literature. These advances were then set back in the 17th and early 18th centuries, when publishing in the Ukrainian language was outlawed. Nonetheless, by the late 18th century, modern literary Ukrainian finally emerged. In 1798, the modern era of the Ukrainian literary tradition began, with Ivan Kotlyarovsky's publication of Oneida in the Ukrainian vernacular. By the 1830s, a Ukrainian romantic literature began to develop, and the nation's most renowned cultural figure, Romanticist poet-painter Taras Shevchenko, emerged. Whereas Ivan Kotlyarovsky is considered to be the father of literature in the Ukrainian vernacular, Shevchenko is the father of a national revival. Then, in 1863, the use of the Ukrainian language in print was effectively prohibited by the Russian Empire. This severely curtailed literary activity in the area, and Ukrainian writers were forced to either publish their works in Russian or release them in Austrian-controlled Galicia. The ban was never officially lifted, but it became obsolete after the revolution and the Bolsheviks coming to power. Ukrainian literature continued to flourish in the early Soviet years, when nearly all literary trends were approved. These policies faced a steep decline in the 1930s, when prominent representatives as well as many others were killed by the NKVD during the Great Purge. In general, around 223 writers were repressed by what was known as the Executed Renaissance. These repressions were part of Stalin's implemented policy of socialist realism. The doctrine did not necessarily repress the use of the Ukrainian language, but it required that writers follow a certain style in their works. Literary freedom grew in the late 1980s and early 1990s alongside the decline and collapse of the USSR and the re-establishment of Ukrainian independence in 1991.